Hi everyone, so this is the CPD for, well, it's week beginning the 18th, but you may well be watching it the following week depending on which kind of group you're in and what your department time is being used for. The focus of this session is scaffolding and support, but again, as I'm trying to do with as many of the sessions as I can in coming weeks, it's going to be with a sort of lens of a distance learning or virtual learning context, because obviously that's what we're faced with at the moment, but you will recognise a lot of the ideas and themes that I'm talking about. So as always, we'll start with a retrieval, and I wanted to just share this really so that you had another idea sort of up your sleeve to be able to use with your students, because this would work remotely, and actually you could get them to type into the chat which one they believe is a lie, and I'll talk about a couple of sort of ways you can do that where you are very much in control of the timing of that. I'll talk about that later. But it could be done, or it could be shared as an editable document and set it up as an assignment, as a little task for students to do, not in a live lesson. But they have to use their knowledge to identify which of the three statements is a lie. But the important bit, so it doesn't become just a guessing game, is that they have to provide the supporting evidence. Whether it's a truth, they have to show how they know it's a truth, and that could be a diagram, it could be just a fact, a statistic, or if they believe it to be a lie, they have to put the contradictory evidence or the fact that they know therefore makes that one to be untrue. So I thought that was quite a nice little task that you could maybe try with your students, but you guys have got to do it with things related to cognitive science basically. So pause me and have a go. You might want to have a discussion about it if you are following this up with a Teams meeting. Okay, so the answers are: dual coding was a truth, because it is true that that idea of dual coding happens when we use both systems of the phonological loop, which is the listening, and the having the visual, using the spatial sketchpad to assist, so you're getting double the effect in terms of encoding. And if we wanted to provide some evidence, we may well have sketched out a diagram. I wouldn't obviously expect that much detail in a short period of time, but you can see how you might work with it in a classroom. The Rosenshine principle is true, that he talks about 3 different types of reviews. So my evidence is that he talks about daily, weekly and monthly reviews being really important. And the false or the lie was, of course, that the EEF toolkit finds metacognition as one of the least effective interventions. It's actually the most effective. And I don't think you can see it there for my head in the way, but I just had done a screenshot of the toolkit showing it's near the top. And I think that's quite useful, that end category column, that the students have to provide the evidence. They really have to think it through, and that could allow you to see where the misconceptions are. Okay, so moving on and focusing on this session then, we are obviously thinking about this particular element of our lesson principles, the scaffold support, but of course challenging, because we teach to the top. And the main things I want to sort of pick out today are things we've looked at before, such as modelling, such as gradually removing scaffolds, and supporting students in terms of their literacy, but try to give you ways of doing that remotely. And so some of it will be reminders, some of it you'll already know because you'll be way ahead of me in terms of technology, but for some of you there might be a few hints and tips you can pick up along the way, because we're all learning as we go, aren't we? So I want to remind you of this diagram that I've used lots of times before, and I suppose it's this part of the diagram we're going to focus on today, this idea of how in a virtual way, remotely, when we're not there to sort of manage the students' time, how can we ensure that we're doing things in small steps, manageable, that we're being able to check the understanding after each of those steps, and that we're helping students to integrate the knowledge and see how it fits in and really shape those schema. So it's all the things that we keep talking about being really important, but it's how we can do that where there's this distance between us. And there are some things that we can try. So I think one of the first things I want to talk about is this idea of explicitly teaching vocabulary. And we know that our students who need the most scaffolding and support, and I'm not just talking about SEND students, but it applies to many of those as well. The best thing we can do for them is to expose them to lots of vocabulary, to explicitly teach it, and to give them lots of opportunity to use it and apply it themselves. But some of those students will need support in doing that. So we know that we explicitly teach vocab, and we might introduce that using the Freya model or by providing lots of examples and non-examples. And you can easily do that in a remote way, either through a pre-recorded video explanation or presenting a short piece on a live lesson and sharing your screen with them. But I do think explicitly introducing new vocabulary needs to have that quality teacher explanation. Many of the Oak Academy lessons do it and do it really well, and then give the students opportunity to check and practice it. And that's great too. That's what we've got to ensure we're doing. The getting students to verbalise it bit, we know how important that is, because if it's, we've said it before, if it's a word that's really important to your subject, for them to not have had a chance to say it several times and to use it in different contexts, they're not really leaving your classroom, virtual or otherwise, having learned it and having really experienced it. So I think it's important we try and keep that. And of course, you could, if you were brave enough, in a live lesson, ask everybody or unmute everybody's microphone and ask them to do that sort of choral repetition that you might have previously done in the classroom. You could, what we call spotlight somebody, and ask them, just one or two people, to say the word and to say it a few times and just unmute their microphone. Or you could just allow, there has to be a certain element of trust and providing opportunities and hoping and trusting that the students will take those opportunities. So if you didn't feel confident with everybody's mics on and it just being a lot of background noise, you could just still pause in that lesson and ask them to say it and ask them to say it again. And they may well have their microphone muted, but you know, many of them will still do it. They'll still practice saying the word because they'll see the value in it. So that would very much be up to you, but I don't think we should just skip that step. We need to, of course, give them opportunity to practice it and to apply it. And you've got to check it. And I know I've sort of touched on some of these ways that we can check understanding and provide feedback using Teams and live lessons in the last CPD, but you could do in the chat function, literally you're in a live team, you could go to the chat show conversation chat function, type in a question, link to this new piece of vocab, so very short factual type questions, could be a multiple choice even, that you could read out verbally, and then you give the students some time to think about it, and then you tell them to type but not send yet, and then you give a countdown like you would if you were doing mini whiteboard activity in the class. You'd say 3, 2, 1, show me your boards. Well, you say, having given them time to think and respond, you then say 3, 2, 1, click send, and you'll then get the barrage of responses, and you can just scroll down and see, yeah, A, or B, okay, and then you can pick up on it. But it's that opportunity to check and to get them to have time to think and to process it. The other thing, the screenshots here that you can see, just another little hint or tip I found along the way, and you might find this useful, you might not. We have to be careful not to overcomplicate things, because we're all just finding our feet with all of this, aren't we? But when you're in your live chat, you're in your meeting, if you go to the 3 little dots at the top where there's lots of options and you click on those, one of the meeting options are turn on live captions. And if you just click on that, what it will do is basically provide a script at the bottom of the screen that the students can see. So it's basically just subtitles. Now, I would be nervous of having it on the whole time, because although I've had a play about with it and they do seem pretty accurate, but I would be nervous about it picking up a word wrong and, you know, ending up with something silly on the bottom. But I think if you're explicitly teaching a new piece of vocabulary, that's quite a nice function, to be able to just temporarily turn them on so that as you're saying the word, and you might be saying it several times, it's appearing at the bottom. you'd probably want to do a test run where you didn't have any students, and I always do it just meeting myself when I'm trying to test new things out, to make sure that the word you really want to focus on is going to end up spelt correctly at the bottom there. But I've tried it with all sorts, and actually it seems to be pretty good, pretty accurate. So that's one little tip you might want to try. We also talk about supporting our students when we're dealing with vocabulary, and also when we're asking them to read, because of course reading is one of the best ways of introducing them to lots of vocabulary and allowing them time to think and to process. I've mentioned to you before, but for the benefit of people who maybe weren't with us or who have never had a chance to try this out or to use it, in Word, which many of us use to produce our documents, and you can easily scan things across from books into Word. On that note, if you've got an iPhone and the notes section, that is basically a scanner. So if you go to notes and then you go into the option of picture and scan, you can basically scan a textbook page and then send it to yourself. So it acts as a scanner. But if you are using Word, you can go to View at the top, and then there's this function called Immersive Reader, and it's got loads of useful things that help those students for whom reading is a barrier to a certain extent, because they're not confident, they're not fluent, but we should never therefore let it stop us exposing them to texts and expecting them to engage with reading, because they're never going to get better. But we have to support them. So we can change the background colour of the page to help students who might have, for example, dyslexia and require a particular page, but also we can alter the text spacing. And therefore that will make it more accessible and more helpful for some students. And the really useful function is the read aloud. Now, obviously, you know your students, and it wouldn't be appropriate to be suggesting all students just put it on read aloud and sit back and listen. But for some students, being able to hear it and see the words, and they should still use those techniques that we would encourage them to use in class, like following along, will really help them to be able to access that text, that Word document that you might have assigned as a task on Teams, and that you expect them to read something and answer some questions. If you just at least make students aware of that, if you're sharing the Word document, make sure they know that that's something that they can use to help support them, and that might just break down a barrier for some of our students. A few other ideas. I know this is sort of me throwing lots of different ideas at you, but hopefully they are all useful. I think what's really important, and this is for all of our students, is to help them regulate their time. I know Andy sent something out about that last week. It's really intense for students, not just the amount of screen time, but suddenly it's over to them. We're setting them tasks, and they think, right, I've got to get this task done. And if that task is taking them way longer than the amount of time a lesson would normally take, they're feeling the pressure to complete it, or many of our students are. And that's then running over and over, and it's becoming unmanageable. And obviously we can massively help. We can help by making sure that when we design our tasks, we really have in mind that things will be taking them quite a bit longer. But also by giving them those messages. I'd like you to do this task. I would expect you to get to this point, but if at the end of the lesson you don't, submit what you've done and I can pick up on things that I need to. And giving those messages that I expect you to work hard. I know how much you can do in 40 minutes. I've given you the explanation. Now do that, but don't go beyond. So it's little messages like that, but also if we are using pre-records, that really will help a lot of our students, because they can pause and they can reflect. But similarly, even if you're doing live lessons, you can do that in the same way you would in the classroom. You give thinking time. But I think we need to, whatever method we're using, we need to be really explicit. I'm going to give you 30 seconds thinking time, and then I need you to type this in. Or I'm going to give you 3 minutes to add your contribution to our collaborative whiteboard, and then I share the screen and we do the collaborative whiteboard function. Or I'm going to count down, and when I count down, I'll be ready because I might ask you a question and I might unmute your microphone. But just being really explicit to help students to self-regulate their time. you can, in the same way that you probably would in a classroom, use timers. Now, of course, if you're just sharing a presentation, you can have a timer built into your PowerPoint, so you can use that method. There is also, of course, if you go to a website like the one I'm suggesting on there, onlinestopwatch.com, there's different classroom timers on there. If you have your web page ready with the timer and you share your desktop, you share your screen with the students, they'll see the timer ticking away. So you can do it that way. But I have discovered, and I've done a few screenshots to try and help you find your way, that within a team, so I've gone into the SLT team here to demonstrate it, but if it was your class team, you go to the plus button at the top. So you have to be within your group. You go to the plus button, you select that you want to add a website. You rename the website, and I just called it timer, and then I put in that web address because I know that's an online, always works, you know, trustworthy, and it's HTTPS, so it's safe, so they'll let me use that web address. And then I unticked this box here because otherwise it was going to tell everybody in the channel and that I'd added a timer, and I don't really think they need to know that. And then click save. And then when you are in that team having a live meeting, the option of using the timer is there. So you can kind of build it in as well. It'll just link you to the website, but you can use that mechanism as well. But I think we should try to structure and provide those timings for our students to help them as well. I also think it wouldn't do any harm, and I'm not suggesting that the teacher's necessarily doing this or leading it, but I don't think it would do any harm to create some breaks and encourage students to do something physical. I'm not suggesting they have cameras on, of course not. I'm not suggesting they have microphones on, and I know therefore we can't be sure that they're going to do it. But I think 1 to 2 minutes broken up at some point in the lesson when it's appropriate, maybe after they've just done a task, or maybe after a little bit of explanation. It wouldn't do any harm occasionally, not maybe every time, to suggest to them that they take a little exercise, 2-minute break, some sort of breathing exercise, get away from the screen, go and move, go and stretch. And this website had some good ideas on. It also had some ridiculous ideas on, but it did have some very simple things that you could maybe suggest to your students, because I do think that is about helping support our students in what is quite a challenging time for them, I'm sure, and help reduce that anxiety and that stress and tiredness as well that we know is caused by staring at the screen for too long, which I'm sure we all experience as well. This is another hint I've just picked up online, which I think can really help our students to understand what's expected of them at each point in the lesson. And it is just that very simple idea of using a little icon. So these are ones that I've come up with, and I've kind of used colour as well. And just throughout the different points, whether it's a pre-recorded lesson where you're sharing a PowerPoint, or whether it's a live one, it's just to have those little icons to indicate to the student what they should be doing, because of course in a classroom we make it really clear, right? Okay, this is the task, this is how much time. I should see everybody picking up their pens now, or right, pens down, eyes this way, you're listening. But we tend not to do that so much when we're sort of teaching remotely or providing learning at a distance. But actually our students are used to it, and they probably require it until they get used to new ways of learning. So something as simple as just a little icon to say that, right, I don't expect you to write anything down, it's listening, or you're reading at this point. The students would just soon get used to that, and it might help them to understand what's expected of them and what work you expect them to submit compared to what work you don't. And you know, the use of the icon, we know it helps, something visual helps the students to not feel totally overwhelmed, but yet still giving them a clear direction. So it's just another idea. Okay, so we know one of the things that we can do to support our students and to help guide them towards learning, basically, is to help them to organise and integrate the new knowledge with knowledge they've already got. So this is coming back to this schemas idea, and this is Mayer's model: selection, organisation, integration. And I've talked about this quite a bit recently, so it's not particularly new. But what I want to do is think about what we could do remotely, distance learning, little things that we can put into our presentation or a document that we could share with students that will help that. And graphic organisers are the classic kind of go-to that we could think about using, and you probably already do. But I think even more important, when we're not there always having that verbal input and not always guiding them through and being able to quickly go to the board and show them how it connects, being able to give them the bigger picture so they can see how things connect, how today's focus fits in with last week's focus and 2 weeks ago's focus. And obviously you would use different graphic organisers depending on what you were trying to show. Are you trying to show cause and effect? Are you trying to show relationship? Are you just trying to show how lots of ideas all feed into something? But I think showing them that, even if it's just in your first 5-10 minute bit live lesson at the start where you're going to introduce something, set them up, show them the big picture, and then they're going to go away and complete some tasks or go and watch an Oak Academy lesson or complete a quiz or whatever it is that you then send them away to do. I think this bit's important. It helps them to integrate it. It shows them how it all fits together. And you could then leave that on the screen if it's in a live lesson, or share it in the assignments or the class materials so that it's a reference point for them. And if it's shared as a document, a Word document where you click on the 3 little dots and say allow others to edit, then they can be typing into it as well, and they can actually be creating their own resource to keep coming back to and keep adding to. So graphic organisers could be really helpful in the same way they are in the classroom. So last few ideas in terms of student engagement really and interaction. So I suppose it's not strictly speaking linked to supporting and scaffolding, but I think in the current context it's pretty important that we're trying different things and making sure our students are engaging with the material we're sharing with them. So if you are doing live lessons, and not everybody is, and as we've seen, sometimes a pre-record might be more helpful for our students because they can pause and think and reflect and look back over things. So I'm not suggesting it all has to be live lessons, but I've mentioned earlier on the type in the chat. Give them think time, give them type time. Remember, not all students are super quick at typing, so that's why multiple choice, where they've just got to type a letter, is useful. And then give them 3, 2, 1, press send. And then it gets a little bit of a competitiveness going. So there's that option. The other thing, which again is great for sort of competitiveness, and I must confess I haven't tried this yet, but I did see a little video on it. In Teams, when a student raises their hand, which you'll be well used to, if you go to the show participants, and you obviously see all the names of the children in your class along the side, the order in which they've raised their hand, they will feature in that list. It will shift them. So you can do a little competition with the kids where you ask a question and then it's like, right, first one to put the hand up and give me the correct answer. And you know, there's no way you could possibly ordinarily see who raised their hand up first, but in your show participants at the side, it will move the one who was quickest to the top. So you can do a little bit of a sort of competition in that regard as well. And then the other thing that obviously it won't work for everybody, and it's just an idea, and it was Andy Gargett who talked about doing this with his classes, and I know I do it with mine as well. If you can leave the team's actual meeting open, and I know some people wouldn't be able to because it would be a problem at home with bandwidth and all the rest of it. But if we know that we're always available for our students, even if we've pre-recorded or we've asked them to do an Oak Academy, we know we're available on Teams and on email for that chat function. But if you can leave the actual meeting open, it's quite a useful structure to start the meeting, to start the lesson off, to do maybe only 5 minutes, check who's there, show them the big picture, your graphic organizer, maybe lead a very short retrieval, or it depends what's appropriate, but that little sort of setting up part of the lesson. Then you say, right, okay, guys, you can sign out and leave, and remind them where they find their task to complete. But you stay on, and you can turn your camera off so that you could turn your microphone off so that you can be having other conversations and busying yourself with other things. But the message to the students is, you can pop back in at any time. If you come across a question, rather than typing me an email and it being really impersonal, just pop back on and ask me, and I'll talk you through it and I'll help you. In the same way, if they're struggling with something. Now, we know lots of students won't take us up on that offer, but it's actually easier for you as the teacher if you can, rather than then having to respond to all these emails and questions like, where do I submit it? We all know we've had those. And similarly, you could therefore organise one-to-one support. If you've picked up that a student is really struggling and they would benefit from a bit of additional help, you just ask them to sign back in at a particular time, and you'd like to have that chat with them and help support them. And you can share your screen and you can bring in alternative resources, and that would really help as well. And breakout rooms might help with that too, depending on the size and nature of your class, but you could put a few students that you felt needed a bit more practice on something into a breakout room, while the others are looking at something else on the screen and maybe completing a short 5-minute timed task, writing a paragraph or something. You go into the breakout room and can maybe provide something different for them. I must admit, I've tried breakout rooms for discussion with students, which has worked really nicely. I haven't tried it for this purpose of sort of providing additional scaffold and support, but I would imagine it would work quite well and effectively. So if anybody tries it, then let me know. I suppose it's the remote version of having a few kids pulled to one side, sat round a table, and the teacher going through a piece of work with them from whole class feedback, where they've really spotted those kids haven't got that particular skill or idea or concept. It's sort of that remote equivalent version. So essentially that's it. And apologies, because as I said, I am no expert with all of this, and I haven't figured out how I record a PowerPoint and insert a video. So there's this to watch, and then there's a very short, I think it's about 3 minutes, video where I recorded myself in a Teams meeting to demonstrate something to you, linked to modelling, because again, one of the other strands I want us to think about is how we can use modelling in a distant learning way to support and scaffold for our students. So when you finish this one, you'll see on the YouTube channel there's a very short one on modelling in Teams, and you can just watch that and then have a think about that as well. So really, just in your departments, I would suggest when you do get a chance to come together that you might think about how you can take some of these ideas and just use the time really to collaborate. So maybe thinking and planning out the idea of using graphic organisers or a sort of big picture to support students integrating their knowledge so they can see where things fit in. I wonder whether anyone in the team could do a demo during a live team meeting for one another, where you could demonstrate some live modelling, because I just think it's better. One, you're helping and supporting each other and sharing ideas and strategies, but also, I don't know about you, but I would rather make mistakes and it all go a little bit wrong with just a small number of colleagues, rather than when I've got a class of 30 students. So, you know, don't be afraid to like try things out on each other and test, and you know, trial and error, test things out and see how you get on. You might want to think about other ways, in addition to the ones mentioned today, that you can ensure students that do have those weaker literacy levels can still access the materials, because we are relying so much on them reading the instructions and opening up the text document and so on, just making sure they're accessible. And Rachel has previously provided some materials about the different needs of the children, and this might be a good opportunity to go back and reflect on some of those as well. So having a look at some of the materials that Rachel has previously sent through, and thinking about how we might adapt them if necessary to the remote context. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there, and as I mentioned before, please then just watch the next very short video, which just demonstrated that idea of how we can use modelling in a live Teams lesson, either using a graphic tablet or just a piece of paper and a visualizer or a webcam, but just to see how effective that can be to help support our students as well. Okay, thanks very much. I'll see you soon.